against political violence and as critiques of political violence in the Middle East, why they have become actually actors of of non-violence, and how do they change this image of passivity, which we all had of women in the past, I would say 100 years, the time that there has been encounter with modernity. This image of passivity of women, at least it's in the mind of many political men around the region, that that women are passive, they have to be passive, and they cannot play a very, very important role, and eventually they are actors of the private sphere and not of the public sphere. Well, this image has been completely changed, especially with the Green Movement and with the Arab Spring. And I think that this non-violent spirit of women's struggle, especially for equal rights, for equal citizenship, has been actually, has played a very, very important role in bringing back, in giving a new image of women in the Middle East, giving a new image of women in the Middle East. I think that what the struggle of women in the Middle East has shown is that democracy is a journey, it's not a destination. I think that's the most important thing that women are still teaching us. They show us, they continue to show us, especially in Egypt, for example, or in Tunisia, against the Muslim Brotherhood, against all those groups who have been fighting against Ben Ali or Mubarak, against dictatorship, but they have this potential of becoming new dictators themselves. They are showing us that democracy is an idea that we need actually to work for it, not only at the domestic level, but also at the national level. And this road, I think, to democracy in the Middle East, what women organizations and organizations like ICALI, I think, are showing us is that it's not a straight road, actually. It's not a road which ends at some point and starts at another point. It's a very bumpy road, actually. It's a thorny road, it's a winding road, it's a long road. This might be, most of you would say, well, I know these things, but it's not that we know it, which is important, it's who are the actors who are insisting of showing it to us. And I think that those who are insisting to showing it to us are those actors, social and political actors, who think of democracy in terms of critique of violence. And they would not come to us and say, look, if we bomb tomorrow Iran, or if we kill these characters of a regime in Egypt or in Tunisia or in Iran or Iraq or Afghanistan, tomorrow everything is going to be rosy and we're going to have democracy. It's very important. I think the only social actors, political actors who know that and who have mentioned it very clearly are women. Women activists in the Middle East. Because their demands goes beyond changing figureheads. As we can see, their demands goes beyond their figureheads, just changing figures. And I invite you, for example, in the case of the Iranian feminist groups, to go and read the feminist school of Nosheen Ali Khorasani and others. All their writing, actually I receive everything they write, they send it to me. And I read it, and it's very interesting. Even the last book which they got, which very recently was published in Iran, is a pamphlet actually. Once again, when you go through the chapters, you see there is a very severe and clear critique of violence and political violence. Not against domestic violence, but the idea of violence itself, and how they are actually inviting politicians, Iranian politicians and political actors to review the whole structural concept of violence in Iranian society, and to go back and remind themselves that if you want to talk about politics as the art of organizing the society and not taking power, but organizing the society, you should at some point get to the critique of violence. And just let me, as usual, finish with a quote from Gandhi, who was somebody who was more of a feminist himself, who did say that if non-violence is the law of our being, the future is with women. And I think that's certainly true for the Middle East. Thank you.
No, we have about until 3:30. We have about 40 minutes for debate and discussion. I just want to clarify one point that Ramin said, and that is the understanding of Iranian women to actually know what they're doing, to set their goals. I think what happened after the first few, maybe the first decade after the revolution, Iranian women understood a few things. First, it was that they have to work together. Secondly, was they have to compromise. When you are working together, you have to compromise. Now, the internet helped a lot in getting women together. And I can give you just 2 examples, and then I'll give it to Roya, who knows very well what I'm talking about. Before the 2009 presidential elections, there were some suggestions from Iran that we better form a coalition or a gathering and put our demands to this sort of candidates, the chosen candidates of the presidential elections. And that idea expanded into a huge coalition of Iranian women, which was completely unprecedented in Iran. I can say I was going back a few years later to write about that coalition, and I went through about 3,000 emails that I passed back and forth with other women throughout the world, mainly from Iran. Most of those women who were in Iran and who were initiating this coalition are unfortunately outside of Iran. One of them is Mariam's mom. Or in prison.
Yes, yeah, most of them are in exile. But this doesn't mean that other women who are in Iran are not active. We have younger generations who came after them. But the way that we all work is that if somebody throws an idea, everybody picks up that idea, and we start debating about it. That coalition formed in this way, and then at the end it could form in about a few demands, which those demands went publicly put into the presidential elections. Presidential election, those people, 4 people. Among them, 3 of them really reacted to women's demands, except Ahmadinejad. Ahmadinejad never participated. The only time we saw Ahmadinejad sort of acknowledged it, he brought his heavily veiled wife to sit beside him, but he ignored the women's coalition completely. But the other 3 candidates, Mr. Karoubi gave actually his platforms, his presidential campaigns to women, said you can come there and talk about it. Mr. Mousavi, under the support of that his wife was giving to the coalition, supported women's coalition in a way, but it was Ms. Rahnavard that basically, I think, became quite more of a feminist that she wasn't before. So that was that coalition that taught women a lot, that how they can work together. At the moment, we have another coalition, slowly, I think, forming, although with me and Doyo, quite a number of them don't agree with the slogans and everything, and that is against war and against the sanctions. That coalition has taken shape. It has been formed into various groups. I think me and Roya and a few others are in the group to actually make international bodies aware of the damages that a possible war would inflict on Iran and the destruction it will bring, and the consequences of sanctions on ordinary people, of lack of medicine. We know that medicine is not sanctioned, but we know that for various reasons the Iranian government either has withdrawn the budget or for whatever reason medicine is getting shorter and shorter in Iran.
So at the moment we have these subgroups under the umbrella of no to war, no to sanctions, of women, hundreds of us are in these groups. So what it is actually forming, and I'm trying to say, is that it's our understanding of the need to get together under one umbrella of one slogan, and not too many of them, at a time, and then work ahead and go ahead. This is what Iranian women has actually learned through 35 years of being oppressed under the Islamic regime. And I think this is one lesson that maybe we can pass on to other countries, about working at it. Through this process, we learned that so much violence has been inflicted on us and on the society that we have incorporated that the concept of non-violent approach into our policies. I think this is another lesson that we have learned and we're passing it on. For example, no to execution, no to torture, and no to very oppressive, laws that comes into the country. So this is what I understand of Iranian women's contribution throughout these years, and their understanding of how they have to.
Okay, several points. I think if I take up one of the last points that you made on about passivity of women, I don't know where many they get the idea from that women may be passive. In the 1906 constitutional revolution, women took up arms, and therefore in Egypt this wrote in the 1920s. So women have been agents of change throughout the last century. In Iran, we've seen them in the Islamic Revolution, then we saw them for Khatami, and now we saw them for the Green Movement. So women have been at the spearhead of change, not just in Iran, but in other countries. So I think it's interesting if men see women as passive, because whether they are passive or not, from a men's point of view, they've been active in trying to improve the society and bring about change. I think one of the most important things that's happened in the last few years within the Iranian women's rights groups and activism is that because of all the oppression, because of all the violence against them physically and legally, this paradigm shift has been in the way that they approach the work that they do and how they view themselves. The women rights activists in Iran and us outside Iran, we all work together. None of us see ourselves as victims anymore. As women, we are not victims. And because we're not victims, we see ourselves as positive agents of change. And that mind shift means that instead of being just sitting down and saying, oh God, there's nothing we can do, whatever we do, they're going to beat us, they're going to hit us, the laws are against us, we are actually taking positive action and thinking, yes, we can organize ourselves, yes, okay, you're not going to allow us to protest in the street, we're going to find a different way of affecting the change, of bringing about the kind of change we're talking about. And one example, again, I go back to the banner, that because the Family Protection Bill affects every single Iranian woman, regardless of her political affiliation, regardless of her religious beliefs, if a man's allowed to take so many wives, if you don't have custody rights over your children, if you don't have certain rights, it's going to affect you. It doesn't matter where your political belief is. So when there is something important enough, even the women who are in office and they want their office, they want their political power, and don't usually offer support, choose to offer support because it affects them personally as well if the law is going to be passed. The girls who did this campaign were very creative. We had episodes of girls getting together and calling the female MPs. At the time we had 8 female MPs. They were calling 8 female MPs and saying, I'm an educated woman, I want your husband to take me as their second wife. Please allow your husband to marry me. So they were putting pressure on the female members of parliament by reminding them that if you don't stand up, because you have political power and you're in office, and you don't want to support us because you don't want to lose your favour, this is what's going to happen to you. And they incessantly called these women. And they incessantly called the houses of other male members of parliament. When their wives picked up the phone, they were talking to the wives and saying, you know what your husband's going to do? He's going to pass this law. And this law is going to be, I'm beautiful, I'm pretty. Next time he sees me, I'm going to force him to marry me. So they were using the kind of language, the kind of mentality that they project onto women in their own favor. So they're using this image of a girl, you know, wearing a bad hijab, being a prostitute. They're using it again in their own favor. And that pressure has meant that although this bill has been in Parliament, it has not been ratified. There's been a great deal of political will for it to pass, but it just has not passed. It's just gone back and forth. They've removed certain articles from it. It's come back. The Guardian Council, which is the guardian of all the interpretation of Islamic law and conformity with Islamic law, says, well, this is ridiculous. In Islam, men are allowed to have many wives. This law says men are not allowed to have it. So it's gone back again. Then there's been another campaign, there's been another surge of effort on the Parliament and everything, and it just has not been ratified. It's still there. We have bad laws, but this is, which is worse law, it has not come into effect. And it's really important that we have a good family protection bill. We are without it. As Payam was saying, we're trying to go back to 1967 because that was the most progressive family protection bill that we had. But at least we don't have this. And this is the kind of thing women are coming up with in Iran. Those of you who've been in Iran will maybe be familiar with this. This is the 1 million signature booklet campaign. They go around, it just explains the kind of discriminatory laws in the Constitution and says it in a very simple language how it actually affects you as a woman. We've had women who stand up to this because in villages they think this means their husband's going to divorce them. This means that if they are given freedom, it means that they're not going to have their protector. So it's in a very sympathetic, simple language to explain what it means if you have rights, what it could mean to you. In response to this is something that the Islamic Republic distributes everywhere. It's the law of women's rights and responsibilities. And it's a very comical read. It's online. If anyone wants to, you can go and read it. It's in English, in Arabic, in French, in every language possible. They're very proud of it. And the kind of rights and responsibilities that you have as women is confined to you being a mother at home, basically. We've had laws of when Ahmadinejad government came into office, and it's got nothing to do with Ahmadinejad, or who's a hardliner, or Khatami, who's a reformist, who actually instigated this cultural engineering project. They're trying to make women back into private, push women back into private sphere, as Rami was saying. I still don't understand why. I mean, you've tried to explain it, I still don't understand to whose benefit is it to have half of the population not being productive, not participating in the progress of the country? Who benefits from this? And that political power, that kind of political economic power would actually benefit by having the participation of women, half of the population. I still don't get it. I don't see who gains by women being inferior, apart from satisfying some crazy male dominant idea. Who benefits?
Well, very shortly, because I see that there are hands if people want to interfere. My point was actually, my point is that there are 2 points actually. One point is that, as you said very correctly, for more than 100, 150 years, let's say 100, no, but for 100 is for sure. All around the Middle East, women have been the main actors, or they have, next to men, they have been political actors in changes. Now, have they been recognized as being political actors? No, they have not been recognized. Actually, all through the Middle East, all through the Muslim societies, when you go and you just want to make if tomorrow you want to make a textbook of the main theorists of change in the Middle East, 99.9% will be men. Okay? It will start with Al-Afghani, it goes through Sayyid Qutb, Al-Banna, Khomeini, and it ends up with people like Khatami. Not one woman is going to be mentioned, not one woman. Okay? Unlike the West, where you will have many, many names of women, and not only the suffragettes, not people like Simone de Beauvoir, not first feminism, second feminism, not only eco-feminists like Vandana Shiva and others, but nobody is mentioned. Nobody, no, not one woman is mentioned. So what my point is, and this is the problem, an issue which is still there. and we have to recognize it. Still, fighting against political violence is considered as a very manly and manlish thing in countries of the Middle East and in Muslim societies. They would say this is a job which has to be done by man, okay? Even in fighting against political violence. When you're thinking of the change which has to come, just name one, for example, in a country like Iran, all the names which come up are on the tongues of people are names of men. In other places, in Egypt, despite the fact that you had people of April 6 like Asma Mahfouz and others who were very active, all the candidates were men, okay? And finally, you had Morsi who won. In Tunisia, you had Ghanouchi. And you have all the candidates were men. Even in a free election, I would say. So that's it. I think that there is an underrepresentation, political underrepresentation of women, even as opponents and as social and political actors. And that's a very, very important aspect. And despite the fact that I believe that, as you're showing it very clearly, and in other countries it's very evident also, women are, unlike men who are fighting for one ideology or fighting for their own political party, they are actually the critiques of a structural critiques of an issue which is much more social than ideologically oriented. And that's why I think their movement and their cause is much more important for the cause of nonviolence.
Thank you very much for a very interesting discussion. I have two questions. One is that, can we discuss women as a homogeneous group, as a homogeneous entity? I was in Tehran and I was walking, and the people who were talking about the way my scarf was going up or down, they commented on it, not in a very aggressive way, but were women. Women with each other, oh, your study is not in the right place. So those people who were commenting about my appearance were not men, they were women. That's one thing. So, although I'm very familiar and well versed in Iranian feminism, and I know how fantastic Iranian women's movement has been, that they have, as Rui very eloquently explained, that how they have incorporated secular and Muslim feminists, Rahran, Rahnavar, all that. I am very, very proud of that. That's very true. But there is another thing which is happening. You were talking about identity. In my university students who used to be very secular, I'm talking about second generation Pakistani, Bangladeshi, now they're all coming with their scarf in the class. So this rise of Muslim identity among women, the same happened in Egyptian Arab Spring. If you look at that, a lot of the women who were there, they had a very clear, strict Islamic hijab. So I am a bit worried about putting women in this fantastic box. And what I'm saying is that the picture is more complex than that. Looking at women as all liberator, that's dangerous. Because I am sure in Iran, I know a lot of the women in our neighborhood who were extremely religious and who were extremely oppressive towards other women who were not religious like them. So I am a bit uneasy about this distinction between women as liberator. I am, as I said, I'm very well versed in Iranian feminism, all right? But this distinction worries me because, first of all, now we have the rise of Islamic identity. We can see it in France with all these North African girls, they are putting their scarf now. This is new. All my students, they used to be without any scarf, they're all coming with a scarf. They try to make me a good Muslim sometimes. They take me to the mosque themselves. I go with them because it's interesting when you see what is happening to them. And in Iran, I think actually, my feeling is that we are very lucky. We have 50 years of modernization, superimposed wrong or right, but we have 50 years of modernization. And the feminist movement is very strong. I totally agree with that. But to extend that and to believe this is the same in the Arab world, I have a lot of hesitation. I don't think the Arab world is where Iranian women are in terms of the women movement and feminist progress. So I'm a bit uneasy about this. I think we need to be a bit more nuanced as far as we're classifying. That's my comment. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Should I answer?
Please.
Yes, we can. About the last comment, I think Dina is
Can
the
we
best
have Casey
person.
comment? Can we have Casey comment as well? I'd love to hear what
Yes.
Casey has to say.
Yeah, I think they would comment
Yeah.
on that.
Yeah.
And then, yes.
Casey, do you want to go first?
Sure. I didn't take any notes, so this is just coming off the top of my head as the warning, I guess. I don't think that when we're having this discussion, I suppose the nuance is slightly implied, which is our fault as well. But yes, of course, women can be oppressors of other women. In the West, we have a phenomenon where men mostly like to hire men and women mostly like to hire men. So we're not saying that that's not something that happens, that women are always one way and they're always liberators and they're, free thinking and anti-religious, which you seem to imply with the way the question was phrased. We very much are advocating for a pluralistic view of the situation and of women, just seeing women as people, and the different variances with that. When we're talking about bringing the veil and how we've seen a resurgence, not in the Middle East, which can be, attributed to an Islamic resurgence, but a rise of the veil in the West, that can be a completely different question, because we're having, first or second generation in like France, they weren't necessarily born in Iran or in North Africa, their parents were, their grandparents were. And so now this is taking on a completely new identity. If you actually interview a lot of the girls in the younger generations that were born in France, and so they are French, there's different reasons why they're taking up the veil, and a lot of that does have to do with these questions of identity. Who am I? Do I want to represent myself as Islamic? And actually in America, some of the more interesting stuff is coming out of America. A lot of the women who choose later in life to veil, who were born in America, are saying things like, I see this as challenging my own culture. I don't like the way that women take off their clothes in advertisements, and I don't like all of this sexism that goes on and that I see in my modern day. So to challenge that, I'm going to put on a veil. And I want people to think about the way that they're exploiting their bodies and that they allow their culture to exploit their bodies. And that's just one answer. And if you actually talk to some of these women coming out of it, you get a variance of answers, just like we're saying, a plurality of people, so everyone has different reasons. So sometimes these reasons I see as a feminist can actually be positive to put on a veil. My issue comes in, of course, whenever there's such a choice forced upon people. I worked as a school teacher in France for a year, which is one of the reasons why I had a lot of interest, and I didn't like it when I had my 15-year-old Islamic students that would not be allowed into the school building until they took off their veils. They would wear them until they got to the door, and then they'd have to take them off to come in. And I think that's horrible for public education. That you can, and it was very much affecting, even though the wording of the law was overt religious symbols, it very much affected Islamic girls and no one else. And so I had a big problem with that. That was my initial reaction, and so that's how I ended up doing a little more study into it. But I should probably stop rambling on now and move on.
I think, again, this is a very layered question and it has so many nuances to it, and I don't have a straight answer. But I agree with you completely. You cannot view women as a homogeneous group of people. I mean, I thought it was very interesting how you were talking about the Iranian experience and how what you learned is that women need to work together. And this is one of the things that we have in Egypt, is that we do not work together as, especially like a very famous example, the women in the parliament, the women who are in the sisters wing in the Muslim Brotherhood, who are in the parliament and who are in the Constituent Assembly. One of them is called Azza al-Garf. We call her Ayman. She's known by her son's name, the mother of Ayman. And she has been saying horrendous statements about women and the status of women. I mean, and saying that the women in the Constituent Assembly who represent the Muslim Brotherhood are the main one of the main proponents of actually articles against them. And they put them forward, and they come on TV shows, and they speak about, and they justify, and they believe and want this. But then this is a very simplistic answer. I can say that, yeah, no, some women are oppressors, and we can't work with them. But I have to say also that the sister wing in the Muslim Brotherhood, I mean, their official discourse is this, but they are extremely empowered. They're very strong. They're women MPs. They are fighting in the public sphere. They are now fighting within the